Hello, and welcome to another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles, and today I'm doubly delighted to have with us two of my very favorite authors, Janna MacGregor and Lenora Bell. Janna's new book is How to Best the Marquess, and Lenora's latest book is A Duke Most Wicked. Before we begin, for anyone listening in, if you'd like a copy of either book or any of the author's previous titles, please feel free to give the Poison Pen a call or go online, and we would be happy to connect you with these truly fun novels. Now I'd like to welcome Janna and Lenora.
Hey,
Hi.
John, it's so lovely to be here.
Thank you
And
for taking
particularly
time.
double lovely because Lenora's here.
It's
Well, this is
wonderful to
just,
be here. Thanks for inviting us. And I hope that we get to visit the Poisoned Pen in person someday.
I hope so too. We would love to have both of you here. You're just amazing writers. I like to begin with authors by having them tell us, as much as they'd like, a little bit about their lives before they became published authors. And why don't we start with you, Janna, because I think you never intended on becoming a writer.
No, I never did. I never did. Well, as many romance authors have done, I was an attorney in a previous life and practiced law for, oh my gosh, 25 years. And,
Wow.
I enjoyed it. It was a great career, but, it was time to step back. After my kids graduated from college, I was done. I wanted to do something else.
And Lenore, if I understand correctly, you had a background in education?
Yes. So I actually received my MFA in nonfiction writing.
Wow.
And well, first of all, in English, a bachelor's, and then an MFA in nonfiction writing. And I was writing travel memoirs. But during my nonfiction classes, I was always writing historical romance on the side. And I just decided, you know what, I should follow my heart. And so I wanted to follow my favorite author, Eloisa James's, in her footprints. So I determined to become a historical romance author. And then I joined Avon Fanlit, which was an online contest for unpublished historical romance authors. And I met Tessa Dare, Courtney Milan, Erica Ridley. This was back in 2006.
Good heavens.
Oh my gosh, wow.
And so I didn't win or even place very high, and so it took me a lot longer, but I met some wonderful authors that I'm still friends with today, and it's such a supportive community, and that's sort of the short answer.
Yeah. What about you, Janna? What pushed you into publication?
Well, let's talk about Eloisa James for a little bit more. I actually went to a conference. It was a Romantic Times conference in Kansas City, which I split my time between Kansas City and here in Minneapolis. And just out of curiosity, I wanted to go. And so, I attended all the events and bought books and did all sorts of stuff. And I discovered Eloisa, and of course, I had read Julia Quinn, but I hadn't read all of her books. So, I mean, that was the first thing that I did, is that I devoured all of Eloisa's. Then I went back to Julia's, and then I discovered Lisa Kleypas. I had never read Lisa Kleypas back then. And so I read all of hers. And every time I read one of Eloisa's books, I mean, they're just delightful and lovely. And I would, send her an email saying, "Oh, I just love this plot point. This was just great." She just eventually said to me one day, you need to write your own book. And so I was like, well, why don't I? So, I did. And that was the Bad Luck Bride.
Wow. And now we're here today, and you both have new books out, or newish. Janna, why don't you tell us about your latest, How to Best a Marquess? It's the third in your series.
Right. It's the third in the Widow Rule series. And this is that beauty that's on there. This is Beth, the third wife. And so this is a road trip romance, a second chance romance. And Lenora was great with me on this for plotting. There's a highwayman scene that she and I worked out, and it was fabulous. My editor wasn't real wild about it at the beginning, and I told her, no, we've got to keep this in there. And so it is. And they, confess all sorts of the two main characters, the Marquess, his name's Julian, the Marquess of Grayson, and then Beth Howell, who's the third widow. And just to step back for a second, this whole series is based upon the concept that three women walk into a solicitor's office and discover that they're married to the same deceased man. And so the three books are the first, second, and third wives. And so you'll have to read it to find out who the legitimate wife was. But anyway, it was just, you know, all sorts of fun. There's a pig in it. There's a statue of Pan. And what it is that it's a mystery of where Beth's dowry is, because her trigamist husband actually took it and spent it. And so she's trying to find out where it is.
What I thought you did brilliantly with the series, Janna, was you'd have these three women who should be at odds, but instead become the best of friends.
Yeah. Well, you know, and I think back then, because, and you and I have talked about this, and Lenora and I have talked about this, you know, women had very rights back then, and they really were in a very vulnerable situation under this idea that they were, two of them are not married, and they're ruined. They're just ruined, you know, in society. And making them business women, I thought it was crucial that they had somebody that they could fall back on when the horrors of this situation really come to fruition for them. And they do. And so, yeah. And they became like sisters. And the very last scene of the book, in the final epilogue, you get to see that family really blossom.
Lenora, your latest book is The Duke Most Wicked, and it's perhaps your most musical novel to date. Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Yes, so John, I'm a musician and I was raised by a musician. My mother is a concert pianist.
Wow.
And also a multi-instrumentalist, and she teaches music for music therapy. And it's a wonder, you know, I was just raised with every musical instrument under the sun in the house, two pianos, all just music. She was practicing her piano 3 hours every night. So I just grew up saturated with both books and music. So in this book, I put my two loves together, and I featured a musical heroine who was also a pianist and a composer. And she had a famous father who was a composer, but there she is. Yes, Viola. And
beautiful.
I just had so much fun putting my own love of music, and also the stories that I was raised with about forgotten female composers and musicians throughout history, like Fanny Mendelssohn, whose works were attributed erroneously to their famous male family members, and that they're being rediscovered today, and their oeuvre is being performed and all of that. So, and I was raised with those stories from my mother, who was always championing female musicians. So, and that's what she has done throughout her career. She is also a voice coach, and some of her students have gone on to great things. And so what I did was, during the long, dark winter in Alaska, I'm in Alaska, in a rural town in Alaska. I don't know if you've ever been to Alaska, John, but
yeah.
A little different from Arizona.
Yeah.
But in the long, dark winter, my mother and I collaborated, and she actually composed an original piece for the book that was written by the heroine Viola, with original music and lyrics. And we published it in the back of the book, and we have a YouTube video of a local soprano performing it. So it was amazing. It was a lot of, I had a lot of fun with this, and it was kind of like a family collaboration.
Both of you write romances set in the Regency era. Can you explain a little bit about why that appeals to you as writers, why you think the time period is so popular with readers? And for anyone who's not familiar, how would you define the Regency era? And we'll start with you, Janna.
Well, I mean, the technical term is, is that period in the British Isles history from 1911 to 1820, when the Prince Regent, Prince George, who was the Prince of Wales, became the regent in name and in power, because George III, the famous king, from Hamilton, the one that had mental illness, he couldn't reign, and so George took over. And I think the reason why I like it so much is, and why it's always been drawn to me, there's two reasons. First off, I love the idea of everybody had to operate in a certain set of rules, and if you stepped out of those rules, I mean, bad things really happened. And so there's always conflict there. And the second reason why I really like it is that my mother was a huge romance reader, but she always read Harlequins. And anything that she brought home, if it was a Harlequin, I know this is horrible for me to say it, but I wouldn't read it because it was my mother, and so I wanted my own. And she just picked up a Barbara Cartland one time, and I devoured it, and that's where I got my love for it.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way to put it. But also, I think, the perennial popularity of the Regency era has to do so much with the original badass boss lady of the Regency era, Jane Austen, she was writing within the era, and she was observing the social mores of the time. And she was actually, bucking everything, all of the rules, because she became a published author. She didn't just get married and have kids and, a lot of the things that her characters are doing. She was out there publishing books. She had a passion for it. She had a goal. She was driven. And so in a way, she, I think, created this, she didn't create, after her, of course, all the authors were writing in her Regency era, because she observed what was going on during her time. And she had focused on female characters, gave them agency, and also focused on the disparity in class differences, and also the powerlessness of women, and women being able to have financial security. So I think, even today, right, I will read anything Jane Austen. I'm watching Sanditon, and, her unfinished last novel, she only wrote 34 pages or something like that. And then now they can do a series because it was unfinished, and they can have an untold number of seasons, and I will watch them all.
So to digress, are you enjoying Sanditon? And there's only one correct answer.
Uh-oh. I am.
Good.
I'm only on
That's the correct answer.
Okay, good.
I work with someone who's quite peeved that it's not historically accurate in many ways, but it's television, so I give it a grain of salt.
Sanditon and Bridgerton, we are blessed right now.
Can both of you talk a little bit? You both have written series, and we have to explain to those listening and that are not familiar. In romance genre, series aren't quite the same as in other genres. They're connected. It could be through a location or through characters, but you don't have to read every book in a specific order to enjoy them like you might in science fiction or fantasy. But for romance series, how do you go about setting up your series? Do you always know in advance? Lenora, you've had some really clever hooks to your series that are kind of referenced in many ways to popular culture. So can you talk a little bit about the role of series as an author, what maybe some of the advantages are and some of the challenges? And we'll start with you, Lenora.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Janna and I, because we're critique partners, we do talk about this when we're developing a series concept. We want to make sure it has legs, that it can extend, and that we create side characters, secondary characters that readers will be like, ooh, she said his eyes were stormy. He must be the hero of the next book, that type of thing. It's just a lot of fun for me, and I think for Janna as well, to work these pop culture references in, because readers love to find these little Easter eggs that we plant. So in the very first book that I featured the heroine of Duke Most Wicked in was 5 books ago. Mm-hmm. And that was What a Difference a Duke Makes. And I pitched that to my editor as Mary Poppins meets Jane Eyre. And I think sometimes, Janna, we start with a question in our mind, right? And here's the question. What if Mary Poppins had Jane Eyre's backstory? Because I read the Mary Poppins books growing up, saw the movie, and I thought, we don't know much about her backstory. So it was just like an interesting little question that I had, and I pitched that to my editor, and she loved it. And I developed the character, as you're talking about continuity through a series. Viola, the heroine of Duke Most Wicked, was always the background character. She was always the secondary. She was the shoulder to cry on. She was the best friend. And then finally, book 6, I get to give her a starring role in her own life. And she gets to be a heroine instead of just the best friend. So it was really fun to build that arc.
Janna?
You know, for me, and this is a little bit of the difference between Lenora and I. I'm a huge plotter, a huge plotter. And I have to know where that book starts, what the middle's going to happen, and what the end is. I've only written one book as a pantser, and a pantser is somebody that just, you know, sits down and writes it. We kind of know what those points are. You know, would you describe yourself as a pantser?
Oh, yes, indisputably
Yes.
so.
Yeah.
To my detriment.
And for me, I have to have all of that stuff plotted out. So, like with this current series that I've got, these widow rules, I knew exactly what was going to happen with every one of them. Now, what's interesting is that the female protagonist in this one, Beth Howe, actually showed up in my second book that I ever wrote. And, you know, she just kind of struck me as somebody that I'd have to keep an eye on. And so when I created this series, I said, oh my gosh, that would be wonderful to bring some of those characters that I didn't get to tell their story to in this one.
Let's talk a little bit about research in terms of your work as authors. Both of you write broadly historical novels, historical romances. What kinds of sources have you used to kind of research your era? What have you discovered about the Regency time period that surprised you the most? And I'll open it up to whoever wants to start.
Well, one time I consulted Janna as my expert because she, you know, she's a lawyer. And I think it was in The Devil's Own Duke, there was the rules of primogeniture, and he was kind of posing as the ducal heir. And I needed a way to I needed a legal solution. So I called up Janna because, you know, you've done a ton of research, I know, about everything legal in the Regency era. Now, my research, I tend to go into like the arts and, you know, archaeology and things like that. But oh, my eyes glaze over when I have to read that Regency era law. But you explained it to me so simply.
Well, thank you. You're being too kind.
What surprised you the most, maybe, about the era?
Well, I think, you know, we're always doing these presentations, Janna and I, about boss ladies in the Regency era because, you know, people say, oh, well, you know, you couldn't really have a female archaeologist heroine, or you couldn't really have, because, you know, that women's roles were so limited. History is filled with entrepreneurial, adventurous, you know, women that just went out there and blazed their own trails. So I'm not surprised anymore when I find these women. It's just, in the beginning, I was surprised because we are taught, because that history is sort of just erased or written over or forgotten, that, you know, women didn't necessarily shape history, but they did. So, I mean, in the book I'm referencing, it was an archaeologist heroine who was trying to find Cleopatra's grave, and this was for the Duke's eyes only. And so you have a strong female character that I based on Lady Hester Stanhope, who was an archaeologist back in the Regency era, who went out there and wore male clothing and rode horses and was digging around and that type of thing. And then you have someone trying to prove that another famous and also very powerful woman in history, that her grave would be, you know, the biggest find of archaeological history, which it still would be. Nobody's found it to this day. So that was kind of an interesting and surprising bit of research that I did, John, was into why hasn't Cleopatra's gravesite ever been found?
Janna, what about you?
Well, as Lenora said, I mean, I wish you could see my office because I've got just research books all surrounding my desk. But my favorite books are, about marriage, about marriage and property rights during that time period. Because remember, our law is based on English common law, except for those folks down in Louisiana, and so much of particularly like in our current divorce laws come from that era. And I just love reading about these marriages, these crazy marriages, how they were arranged, and what was transpired in the settlements, etc. And like Lenore, I do research a lot of women too. I mean, like, I've had a banker, I've had a gal that owns a linen shop, somebody that owns a shipping business.
Company, yeah.
So,
Do you find that it's easy to maintain a balance between you're writing historical romance, but you have to balance what readers today want to know about the period with overwhelming them with lots of details? Is that an easy thing for you to do as a writer? Do you find your editor or someone saying too much history? How do you strike that right balance between putting the reader in that time and place, the modern reader, without it reading like History 101?
Well, I mean,
you want me to go?
Both of you, but one of you start.
It is a difficult balance to strike because you want to make it colorful, and you want to bring the details that will bring the period alive, but you don't want to just info dump a bunch of historical things. So I think it's all about picking, and I think Eloisa James says this, it's picking historical details that are not only appropriate to the story, but have personal and emotional significance for the characters. And Janna, I know in the intro to How to Best a Marquess, you thanked Dr. Vanessa Riley. And she is such a font of knowledge about the Regency era and her website. And then I think she is one of the authors that is just bringing these significant and emotional and meaningful historical details to life, right?
She's really
Exactly.
changing things because she's exploring time periods and countries that are not frequently used and she's doing it both for historical fiction, historical romance, and she's started a historical mystery series, I believe.
I know.
When does she sleep?
She's amazing.
Question.
Well, she drinks coffee all day long. Seriously. Her husband will go to Starbucks, first thing in the morning, and get her 5 or 6 cups, and she'll just eat them up all day long. It's crazy.
You've talked a little. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I was just going to say with Vanessa, my male protagonist in this book, How to Best a Marquess, is trying to build a compound engine. Now, it's a little bit early for that, but there's a scene in there where he has to explain how a compound engine works. So I went ahead and I worked through it, and then I sent it to Vanessa and said, does this, have I missed anything? And she's like, no, you're good. So, she was great, but I made it very, very easy for anyone to understand, because back then I think it would be difficult to try to imagine what that was if you've never really seen an engine before.
Do you find that you include when you're writing your books, do you do author's notes at the end? Do you include more information on your website? How do you kind of clue readers in that this is what I've made up and this is what is actually based on historical fact?
I do it on every book because it's I think readers enjoy it, because I think that they learn quite a bit from our research. But I also think that they rely sometimes too much on our research instead of going out and finding it themselves. But yeah, it gives them away. And I try to tell them where I get my research so that they can have an understanding, or if they want to go check it out, they can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've learned stuff from reading your notes at the back of your book. But Yeah, I don't always include it. I think my books are a little more, as John said, they're a little more pop culture based, and so I'm sort of lightly skimming over the historical setting. It's more of almost a fantasy Regency setting. I'd say in the similar world to someone like Tessa Dare, who's writing, you know, but so in my last book, I did include an author's note because I wanted readers to go and do more research about these female musicians that I uncovered. And they spanned all ethnicities and eras, and just female musicians that have been forgotten. And now, finally, their works are being performed. So it's just, yeah.
I think that's a terrific answer, Lenora, but I also don't want you to take anything away from your own books, because I think what having both of you discuss your works illustrates is what a range there is within even this specific subgenre. People think historical romance or private eye detective stories or anything, they're all the same. There's kind of this monolithic type of book that comes out, but you've both shown with your works that for readers, there can be books that are a little bit more skewed towards the historical side. There can be books that deal with it more in a lighthearted way, and that doesn't take anything away from the story because they're both equally difficult to write, I imagine. And I think one thing that you do, Lenora, that I've really admired is you throw things into your story so cleverly that if you blink, you miss it. But if you're reading very carefully, you see something, you think, how did she do that? That must have taken a lot of really preparation and work just for that one moment. It doesn't, if you miss it, it doesn't take anything away from the story. If you see it, it's just another little kind of twinkle to the whole plot.
Yeah, oh, thank you, John. I do enjoy it, and I chuckle to myself thinking, I wonder if the readers will get this reference to Anne of Green Gables, when I call someone a kindred spirit, or, and that's just me having fun. It's kind of like a little love letter to certain readers, but they won't know who they are till they discover it.
Let's talk a little bit. You've talked about your writing process and how you approach your books. Both of you have written for traditional publishers, but both of you, if I'm correct, have dabbled just a little bit in indie publishing through novellas or short stories. Can you talk a little bit about what drives you towards one market or the other as an author? And I'll start with you, Janna, or Lenora. Yes.
No, I just, well, first off, one of the reasons why I like to do some indie publishing is that there are no rules. You don't have to really hit those, let's call them notes for Lenora. You really don't have to hit those notes that your publisher expects you to hit, or that a traditional Regency reader would expect to have within the book. And the other thing of it is that we can do great things with these indie projects. Like Lenora and I were in this sunflower season last summer, and it raised, close to $30,000 for several charities in Ukraine to help them with their health and childcare as this horrible war continues. Yeah.
I'm going to be authors contributing their stories to that. So you're basically giving your time. Yeah.
Exactly. It's amazing. I'm going to be in another one this summer called Pride Not Prejudice, and it's to help the LGBTQ and Planned Parenthood, several charities within that, because it also helps bring awareness. But I just like it too because I can write whatever I want to write, and nobody's, if a reader doesn't like it, that's fine. They can just go on to the next story. But it's it kind of lets you exercise your writing chops in a way.
And as a reader, I love to read these indie published series by like some of my favorite authors like Erica Ridley and Darcy Burke and Ava Devon, because they come out every 3 to 5 months. And then it's just, I am a slow writer, very slow, and I wish that I could produce more quickly. But in the meantime, I can read my friends' books that come out swiftly, and we all have our own different process. And I'm not going to beat myself up for being a slow writer, but I will say that participating in the Ukraine anthology, The Sunflower Season, made me finish a novella. And it was wonderful because I need deadlines. So
in terms of writing, you both have been doing it for a while now. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given about writing in the publishing business?
well, John, I have a favorite book. It's Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic.
Mm-hmm.
Have you read that? And it's about the creative process.
I've read her fiction, but not her nonfiction.
Oh, you have
Okay.
to read this. It's for everybody. It's not just for writers. It's all
Okay.
about just creative lives and any type of a block that you're trying to overcome. And I use it sort of as almost like an oracle. If I'm feeling like stuck in my writing or I'm down, I just open it at random, and I call her Oracle Liz. She gives me the perfect advice. And one of the things that I always have on a Post-it note is a good enough book written now is better than a perfect book written never.
That's true.
And that is like the mantra I have to tell myself, because I'm a perfectionist, and I would never ever finish a book if I didn't follow that advice and just write it out, just get it onto the page.
I think for me, the best advice I've received was, or that I could give somebody is, just don't sweat the small stuff. You can't control everything, and as the day wears on, just move it and go, as Nora Roberts always said, and this gets back to what you said, just set your butt in the chair and write it, because you can't edit a blank page.
Yeah.
And you just go from there.
Let's shift
And if
gears
something bad happens, it's happened to somebody else before. It's not, you're not the guinea pig in this stuff. So
I think that's one thing that has changed for authors is 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it did seem very much like you were in it by yourself. But with the advent of the internet and writers groups and things like that, it's much more of a community now you can call upon. Let's switch gears and talk about both of you as readers. You both mentioned your introduction to romance. Who are some of the books that have been, I guess, touchstones in your reading life? Are there any particular books you're looking forward to this summer that are on your reading list? I'll throw it open to whoever wants to start.
Well, I read widely, and not just in the romance genre, of course. I think we all do. I love romance, but I'm also, and this is interesting for the Poison Pen, I am a huge thriller and mystery and crime fan. Yes. And right now I'm reading Rachel Hawkins' The Villa.
I love her.
I do too.
But have you read The Villa? Her latest?
No, it's on my list. When I get all my work done and my assigned reading, I get to read that.
I think it's her best book yet. And I'm having to pace myself. Those books where you're like, you don't want it to end.
Mm-hmm.
You have to pace yourself, and you're like, I'm going to dole little bits of this book out to myself as a prize, as a pleasure. So I'm just a huge Rachel Hawkins fan. I'm also, all the other mystery and writers. And I haven't read Vanessa Riley's, you mentioned I think it's Murder in
Westminster? I think so, yeah.
And I have that on my Kindle. I haven't read it yet because, yes, I'll read anything she writes. Of course, we have Julia Quinn and Shonda Rhimes, Queen Charlotte coming out.
May 4th. No, May 9th. May 9th.
Before we know it.
Adriana Herrera.
Yeah, I've got that on my list too. And I just ordered a book today, and I got an email on it. There is at Buckingham Palace, they've got a new exhibit that's going to open up in May called Style and Society, Dressing the Georgians. And I think and it's got Queen Charlotte on the front of the book that they're selling to go with this. And I think it's in conjunction with, JQ and Shonda Rhimes, Queen Charlotte. So how interesting is that?
That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. One of the West. Now, I have read this, but this is coming out. It Happened One
Oh, I
Night
want to
by
read that.
Maureen
It's so
Lee.
fabulous.
It's so, so good. It really is.
Oh,
It's this golden age of Hollywood romance. I've never read anything like it, but it's, everything is going. The dialogue is just so snappy, and the plot is just hysterical. I mean, it's like the opposite of what happened in my Widow Rule series. Three women married to the same guy, but really, two of them aren't married. In this one, they thought it was a publicity stunt. That it was something for a movie, and they ended up actually being married. So it's, how to get a divorce from it, if that really happens. But I'm not going to say anything. But that's one. I'll tell you what. And EJ's or Eloisa James. Let's see, what is it? Not That Duke.
Not That Duke
is coming out. It's coming out in July, and I love Lorraine Heath, and she's got the Notorious Lord Knightley. That second book in her Chessman series, that's really good.
yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, and I like T.L. Swan. If you guys have heard of her, she writes a lot of billionaire stuff. She's a Montlake author, and she's got a new series that's coming out. And the first book is My Temptation. So I can't wait to get a hold of that.
One of the things authors today have to do that they didn't in the past was you're also your own marketing team in many senses. So are there particular social media platforms that you gravitate to? How do you get readers to find out more about you and your books? And I know, Janna, you mentioned Book Talk. I think that. Are you on that? Can you tell us about that? I'm completely an idiot when it comes to social media, so you'll have to speak to that level. But what about you?
It's a double-edged sword with TikTok, because of everything that's going on with that social media side. But there is a group on there called Book Talk, and it is, these voracious readers, and they really welcome being introduced to different types of genres and things. And so I'm on that, but I spend probably the majority of my time on Instagram and then within my Facebook group. And that's, it's a way for me to introduce to my readers not only my books, but also the books that I love and cherish, and introduce my author friends like Lenora.
Yeah. Well, you're braver than I am, Janna. I haven't posted anything on TikTok yet. But I do appreciate Instagram, just because I love to have a good Instagram feed with beautiful photos, and also then the more personal stories that go with the photos. I have a reader group as well, Lenora's Bookish Bells, and that's a more personal way to interact with readers on Facebook, because it's more of a private group where, we don't have to worry about trolls coming into our comments and trying to get people to give them their credit card information. You have to be so careful nowadays. It's just as Janna said, a double-edged sword, a minefield. Navigating it, we're all still learning, but we're in it together.
And I'm sure both of you have websites readers can go to for information.
Yep, mine is www.jannamacgregor.com.
Yep, lenorabell.com.
And you're free to decline to answer this question, but I always like to know if there's something new in the works for authors and what you might be able to tell us about that upcoming project. We'll go with you, Janna.
Yeah, I've got a book that I'm writing now. I don't have a title, but it will be published next year, and it's set in the Regency period. It's almost like a new adult, and it's a 2-book series, and it's going to kind of frame itself around various social and mental issues that young people face. And this first book is about social anxiety, and I just love it, because the question is, what's a wallflower? A wallflower is somebody that wants to be, she wants to, or he wants to have someone come and ask them to dance and notice them and do things like that. But if you have social anxiety, that's like your worst nightmare. You don't want to be picked out in a crowd. You want to stay hidden. You just want to keep your small group. So I'm really having a lot of fun with that one.
That's so brilliant, Janna. I mean, it really explains why. I mean, people think it's their fault because they aren't out there dancing and flirting and becoming the belle of the ball, but it could very well be something that's personal, like social anxiety.
Yeah.
What about you, Lenore? I've been waiting and waiting and waiting. When can I read something by you? That's new.
I know I'm a slow writer, but first of all, I have to say that as Janna's critique partner, I get sneak peeks of her books. And so I've had a sneak peek of How to Best a Marquess, and it is phenomenal. I love a good road trip romance. Sweet. I love a good second chance romance. And Beth and Julian, first of all, he is hot. He's just really, swoon worthy. And then they're on a road trip together. And this new one that you're working on, I haven't had a sneak peek yet, but
you will, I promise you.
All right. And what's up next for me is I have a new series that's beginning, and it's called the Thunderbolt Club. And this is a series with Avon that is inspired by classic musicals because, of course, back to the music.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one is inspired by Grease, and it has got Sandrine, Oliver, and Dane, the heir to the Duke of Rydell. So this is just a fun, frothy Regency rom-com that is going to have all of the Grease references that any reader could desire. And then the second one will be based on the musical Annie. So we'll be going back. Yeah, and I'm just having a lot of fun with that. And I think it's called You're the Duke That I Want. You're the Duke That I Want. And it will be coming in November. Sorry.
Perfect Christmas gift for romance readers. Well, I can't believe how quickly time has flown by with two of my favorite authors, Janna MacGregor and Lenora Bell, talking about their new and newish books. I'd like to thank both authors for taking time to virtually visit the Poison Pen, and I'd like to thank everyone who's tuned in to another author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore. Thank you.